Hello again, I'm Blunty and I'm about to take a peek into the world of the new Nikon D4. For a complete picture of the Nikon D4's punch, alongside this video will be a couple of companion videos to look at shooting stills and the hardware itself. But this one is all about the moving image. For testing, I had three lenses made available to me: the ever classic 24-70mm 2.8G, the ultra wide angle 14-24mm 2.8G, and another much loved favourite of Nikon shooters, the 70-200 2.8G. So let's take a look at how the D4 does when doing the thing what it does do. With the D4, Nikon have finally started taking video very seriously in their DSLR range, like the simple but pretty vital inclusion of a headphone port for monitoring your audio, so you no longer just have to hope and guess that the signal is clean and the levels are set correctly. And now, instead of the near useless 5-minute 720p clips the otherwise excellent D3S offered, you now have got a whole range of resolutions and frame rates to choose from, and a much more useful recording cap of 20 to 30 minutes depending on your settings. Oh, and of course, as a big black block of pro gear, it's weather sealed, so you can concentrate on getting the shot done, not stuff like if an unexpectedly big wave could destroy your investment instantly, or panic if it rains. That big full-frame sensor gives you huge amounts of control over your depth of field, allowing you to show the whole story or selectively isolate your subject. And if you're like me and are more accustomed to shooting on crop frame cameras, this can take a little time and brain gear shifting to adjust to. It's amazing what a difference the jump in sensor size makes and how you approach shooting. The D4's significant heft makes it less than ideal as a handheld video shooter. It can take up some concentration to keep it steady, especially without some kind of rig to help spread the load and provide some kind of stabilization, or better yet, a tripod. But there's little denying that in all other respects it does a damn fine job. There is the ability to ask it to track autofocus for you, but frankly most focus systems on DSLR lenses aren't built with this in mind, so it's really much better planned to use single autofocus or manual focus. You'll get smoother and more predictable results. Now, as for the dreaded rolling shutter or jello effect that causes vertical lines to bend and wibble and wobble in panning motions, which can be especially cripplingly bad on full frame sensors, well, see for yourself. Nikon have all but nuked it from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. Even when we get to whip panning speeds, the rolling shutter effect is so minor it's practically negligible, and certainly manageable with some software correction if you're really anal about it. No longer will shots be rendered unusable by wibbly-wobbly jello effects. That's awesome. But be aware, if you use the DX crop mode in video, it rears its head again rather aggressively, so if you are shooting handheld or require panning shots, make absolutely sure you're shooting in full frame FX mode. All the manual control you can ask for is present, of course. You can shoot in any of the standard PASM modes, and any adjustments you need can be made on the fly without having to stop recording. But the clicking noise of the dial wheels to make these adjustments can and will be picked up by any onboard mic, so plan accordingly. And for the less experienced viewers out there, here is why manual control is so very important. It can mean the difference between a beautiful flowing image and one that just looks like ugly amateur video. Dynamic range is impressive too, even in extreme examples like this. In heavy shadow under a low jetty shooting out into bright morning sun, you'll maintain good detail, contrast and clarity across the entire exposure. And speaking of morning skies, skies just like this, which gently fade across the tonal range, can sometimes cause color banding in cameras with poorly implemented video encoding engines, especially so on cameras that record to MPEG-4 files using lossy encoding like the H.264 codec that the Nikon D4 and a bunch of other cameras on the market use. But as you can see here, well, hopefully, if YouTube's own encoding hasn't introduced the artifacts, it's a nice, very smooth, gentle transition across the entire sky's tonal range. But if you're after the very best possible video file you can get, you can use the clean HDMI output and an external deck to record at a much higher bitrate and in a format more friendly for professional productions. Something else to love about Nikon cameras is the inbuilt intervalometer, so you can do time lapses without having to buy extra controllers and add-ons and gizmos and gadgets. Naturally, the D4 has this too, with complete control over total time, interval between shots, number and number of cycles to repeat, and blah blah blah. It's fantastic. And you have two options for time-lapse formats too. You can either ask it to snap off a series of full-resolution photographs, which will cost you more space on your memory card and more time on the back end, as you'll have to assemble them and convert them into a movie file yourself on the computer, but you get a lot of resolution to play with, so you can do faked camera moves and zooms and such in your editor. Second option is you can ask the D4 to snap off shots at 1080p resolution and it'll fold them into a video file for you, ready to go right off the memory card. Nikon's DSLRs have for years now been known as the gear to turn to when you want superb low light performance. Well, now with the D4's shiny new video muscle power, that high ISO performance is yours for the asking. And even at ridiculous extremes like using a single tiny tea light candle as the only source of light in the entire room, you can still get really usable results. You've also got some boosted ISO modes at the top end, up to an ISO equivalent of 204,800, which is perhaps only really useful for documentary type shooting when you're desperate and getting the moment is far more important than getting the cleanest image, but noise becomes pretty violent pretty quickly at these high ends. But inside of the natural ISO range, even at the top ISO 128,000, it's amazingly clear. There is noise, of course, and detail softens a bit, but it's a long way from being useless. And noise vanishes surprisingly quickly as you step down through the ISO range. And remember, this is lit with a single tiny candle. In the real world, even in conditions anyone can call low light, you'll have way more photons bouncing around than in this test. Oh, and if you are shooting in the dark, you can keep that little flashlight in your camera bag and your night vision intact, because the D4's operational buttons can be softly backlit at the flick of a switch under the shutter. Do not underestimate how wonderful this seemingly simple feature is. When I was testing the low light performance out in the real world, it was invaluable. Too many times have I fumbled and stumbled and squinted in the dark to change a setting on other types of cameras. I want this on every camera I own and will ever own. And just to give you a frame for just how low the light levels were here, I took some footage with my iPhone 4S, purely for a common point of reference to put the D4's light gathering talents into some kind of comparative perspective. I'm not sure many people will buy the D4 with the intent of using it primarily as a video rig, mainly because the Nikon D800 exists in the world and that would seem slightly more practical in a few key ways. But for those who need the power and abilities specific to the D4 over the different kettle of fish that is the D800, it is really nice to know that the D4 can be relied upon for impressive video performance. It's certainly capable of delivering some remarkable images, perhaps in more skilled hands than mine, and of course the level of control that pros desire and require. Thanks for watching, I'm Blunty, and I'll catch you next time.